Everything you have heard about the Anunnaki as ancient astronauts is younger than the TV. There are no spaceships on the tablets. There is no 12th planet. There is no story of aliens mining gold and engineering the human race. None of it is Sumerian. All of it was written, in plain English, by a single man in 1976. The real Anunnaki are far older and far stranger, and they have nothing to do with the stars in the way you have been told. They were gods. Tonight, we separate the gods on the clay from the aliens on the paperback, and we watch, step by step, how a modern myth was built on top of an ancient one. Here is the claim, stated plainly, so you can hold it through everything that follows. The Anunnaki are real. They appear by name on clay tablets, thousands of years old, pressed into wet clay in the cities of ancient Iraq. But the Anunnaki you have met online are not those beings. They are a modern invention, assembled in the 1970s by one writer and sold as ancient history. So this is really two stories braided together. The first is the true one, who the Anunnaki actually were to the people who worshiped them. The second is the strange one, how a man named Zecharia Sitchin took those gods and rebuilt them into space travelers and convinced millions that his version came off the tablets. By the end, you will be able to tell them apart at a glance, and you will see exactly where the seam between them lies. Let us begin where the real story begins, with the word itself. Anunnaki is an ancient term and a slippery one. In the older Sumerian language, it appears as Anunna. In the later Akkadian, the language of Babylon and Assyria, it becomes Anunnaki. Scholars who have spent their lives reading these tablets translate it, very roughly, as something like the offspring of An, the great god of the sky. It is not a name for one being. It is a collective title for a whole group of gods. And crucially, the meaning shifts across the centuries. This is the kind of detail the alien version simply erases. In some of the oldest texts, the Anunnaki are the high gods, the great assembly of the heavens. In other texts, especially later ones, they are pushed downward and become gods of the underworld, judges of the dead. The word travels. It does not name a fixed crew of characters. It names a category, and that category moves over time. So already we have a problem for the modern myth. The tablets do not describe a single landing party of astronauts. They describe a shifting class of deities, sometimes ruling the sky, sometimes ruling the grave. Hold that in mind, because what happens next on the tablets is one of the most human stories the ancient world ever told. In the Akkadian epic called Atrahasis, written down well over 3,000 years ago, we get an origin of humanity, and it is nothing like the version you have been sold. The story opens before there were any people at all. In that age, the gods themselves had to do the labor of the world. They had to dig the rivers. They had to clear the canals. They had to break their backs, keeping the earth in order. And the gods who did this brutal work grew exhausted, and then they grew angry. So they rebelled. The laboring gods set fire to their tools, surrounded the house of their overseer, and refused to work. It is quite literally a strike, a labor revolt in heaven, in a poem older than the Bible. To end the standoff, the great gods propose a solution. They will create a new being to carry the burden instead. They will make humanity precisely so that the gods can rest. A god is slaughtered, and his flesh and blood are mixed with clay, and from that mixture the first humans are shaped to bear the labor the gods no longer wish to bear. Now hold that beside the modern story. Both versions agree on one striking point, that humanity was created to do hard labor for higher beings. And that single, genuine overlap is the hinge the entire alien myth swings on. Keep watching, because in a moment you will see exactly how one writer took this real detail and twisted it 90 degrees into something the tablets never say. Before we reach that writer, look closely at what kind of beings these gods actually are, because they are not cold technicians from space. They are almost unbearably human. In the great Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish. The gods are born from the mingling of fresh water and salt water. They are young and loud and restless. They quarrel. They frighten their elders. A war breaks out among them, and a younger god, Marduk, rises to kill a primordial mother monster and split her body to make the sky and the earth. These are gods with bodies and tempers and family grudges. And the Anunnaki sit inside that family, in the Enuma Elish. After Marduk wins his great victory, it is the Anunnaki who acclaim him and for whom he organizes the cosmos. They are assigned their stations. They build a temple. They throw a banquet. They behave like a divine court, not a flight crew. Look at the goddess Inanna, the most vivid of them all. In the poem we call The Descent of Inanna, she goes down into the underworld and is stripped and judged and hung on a hook like a piece of meat until she is rescued and a substitute is dragged down in her place. This is a goddess who can be humiliated and who can die. Does that sound like an astronaut? It sounds like a god, a jealous, passionate, grieving, magnificent god. That is who the Anunnaki really are. Now let us watch them get abducted. Here is the turn, and it is the moment the whole picture inverts. In 1976, a writer named Zecharia Sitchin published a book called The 12th Planet. He was not a trained Assyriologist. He was a man with a theory and a gift for telling it. And in that book, he announced that he had cracked the secret hidden in the Sumerian tablets. His claim went like this. The Anunnaki, he said, were not gods at all. They were flesh and blood astronauts from a hidden planet in our own solar system, a world he called Nibiru on a vast elongated orbit. They came to Earth, he said, to mine gold, which they needed to repair their dying atmosphere. The work was hard, so they genetically engineered a primitive worker to do the mining for them. And that worker was us. Humanity, in Sitchin's telling, is a slave species built in a laboratory by gold-hungry aliens. It is a thrilling story. It is also, by the judgment of the scholars who actually read these languages, an invention from start to finish. There is no tablet that says any of this. Sitchin built it, and to see how we have to look at his method. The honesty of this channel is in the details, so let us be specific about what Sitchin did, because the technique matters more than the conclusion. Take the word Nibiru, the famous 12th planet. Nibiru is a genuine Babylonian word found in real astronomical texts. But to the Babylonians, it was not a hidden death world swinging in from deep space. Scholars identify it most often with the planet Jupiter, or with a point in the sky, an ordinary object the astronomers track. Sitchin took that real word, severed it from its real meaning, and reattached it to a planet of his own design. The word is ancient. The thing he describes is not. He did the same with the gods. He took the genuine detail that humanity was made to labor for the gods and quietly swapped the gods for aliens and the clay for genetic engineering. He read spaceships into texts that described temples and divine thrones. Scholars who checked his translations against the actual cuneiform found that his readings simply do not hold. A Semitic languages scholar named Michael Heiser went through Sitchin's claims line by line against the dictionaries and the grammar and showed that again and again the tablets do not say what Sitchin said they say. The broad consensus of Assyriology agrees. The astronaut reading is not a daring decoding of the texts. It is a story laid on top of them. And yet none of that stopped it. Which is the real mystery here. Not whether the aliens were real, but why the story spread so far. So why did it work? Why did a paperback theory rejected by every specialist become one of the most repeated ideas about the ancient world? Part of the answer is the year. Sitchin wrote in the 1970s, in the middle of a wave of fascination with the idea that ancient monuments were too marvelous to be the work of ordinary human beings. It was the age of the ancient astronaut bestseller, of the notion that pyramids and giant statues must have had help from the sky. Sitchin gave that mood a sacred text. He pointed at the oldest writing on Earth, the genuine clay tablets of Sumer, and said the proof is here in the first words humanity ever wrote. and part of the answer is older and deeper. There is something in us that does not want our gods or our makers to be entirely lost to time. The astronaut story offers a strange comfort. It says the old myths were not myths at all, but garbled memories of something real, that we were watched and shaped, and that the watchers might one day return. It is in its own way a religious promise wearing the costume of science, but notice what it costs. To believe it, you have to take the real Anunnaki, the grieving goddess on her hook, the gods on strike with their burning tools, the trembling assembly acclaiming Marduk, and throw all of it away. You have to trade a 4,000-year-old human masterpiece for a paperback. The tablets are more interesting than the aliens. That is the part the myth never tells you. So consider what we have actually followed tonight. A word on the clay, Anunna, the offspring of the sky god, that named not a crew but a shifting class of deities, ruling the heavens in one age and judging the dead in another. A story of gods who went on strike and made humanity out of clay and divine blood to carry their labor. A goddess who could be stripped and killed and mourned. These are the real Anunnaki, and they are stranger and more human than any spaceship. And then, laid over them like a second skin, a tale from 1976. A hidden planet, a mining expedition, a slave species built for gold. Not decoded from the tablets, but written onto them by one persuasive man in one persuasive book in a decade hungry to believe it. The strange thing is how completely the new story buried the old one. For most people now, the word Anunnaki summons the aliens first, and the gods not at all. The invention has all but eaten the original. The men who pressed those tablets wrote to remember their gods forever. They could not have imagined that 4,000 years on, their gods would be remembered mainly as something they never were. So here is the question that lingers. When a modern myth grows strong enough to swallow the ancient one it stole from, which version, in the end, becomes the truth that people live by? But that is a story for another night.